Let me just check if we are live. Yes, we are live.
Hello.
Sorry, this is like the start of our podcast pretty much every time I'll. All right, we're live. Hello and welcome to episode 70 of the Discontent Podcast. I'm Aditya Khanna. With me is Bharat Misra.
Hi.
And we have a very special guest today. Someone who actually sort of inspired us partially to start this podcast because he's, in both of our opinion, one of the best podcasters in India, the host of The Seen and the Unseen, Amit Varma. Amit, thank you so much for giving us your time and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm always up for a good conversation and this is going to be fun. What is the difference between special and very special?
Special are people who are like,
Oh my God.
are people who we are calling for no ulterior motive at all. So this is just for like, that's a joke to all the other guests. Sure.
Yeah.
But yeah. So
I
yeah.
mean, as Aditya mentioned, like definitely an inspiration to keep the podcast going for sure.
No, I was kidding and thank you for the kind words. I'm honored you now you put pressure on me. But thank you for the kind words.
Listen,
I appreciate it.
Listen, you have no reason to bait us for compliments. Like we are gonna shower them.
No, please don't.
All right. So just to start off and to give our listeners and viewers, I'm assuming there are going to be some more new people over here. This is primarily a film podcast, and Amit, those of you all who know him, does a podcast on economics and policy and a lot of those kind of things, and not necessarily something that focuses on film specifically. So we want to know his sort of perspective on films and how your journey has been through films. So for example, while going through your podcast, like we have a pretty concrete idea of your journey, your sort of intellectual journey, whether it's with nonfiction books, politics, economics, history, all of that. But what has been your journey with cinema? And to start off with a specific question, what is your first memory of a movie theater or a movie that you remember and that you loved or you obsessed over?
Yeah, so I actually have a deep abiding passion for cinema because I got very lucky in the sense that my father was a director of the Film and Television Institute of India in Pune. He was an IS officer.
Wow.
So between 86 to 91, he was a director of FTII. In fact, at one point, he expelled Sanjay Leela Bhansali as well. But leaving that aside, not for aesthetic reasons, sadly, but leaving that aside, so for those who know Pune, they'll know that when you pass the FTII campus, there is this red building which is out there, which is like known as the director's bungalow. And so I used to live inside there. And I was therefore really fortunate because 86 is when I'm 11 years old. And what would happen is that there happened to be a Betamax player at home. And my dad would get all these, every day he'd, get a couple of films and take them back the next day. And there were all these Betamax tapes and I would watch them there. So I got exposed to films at an age where I hadn't yet developed a conception that it is cool to watch this. So this is art films and that's commercial films and all that. Those thoughts weren't there. I was just watching films, just because I enjoyed watching films. Hey, here's another film. It's a great story. Enjoy watching it. So I would at one point in time watch 2-3 films a day and fell completely in love. And a lot of what I was watching was what you would today call world cinema. But like I said, at that age, that young, that distinction didn't exist in my mind. And this is all pre-internet days, right? This is all, you can't go online and access the writings of Roger Ebert and Pauline Kael and so on and so forth. All that comes later. So it's just a pure cinema speaking to you and there's nothing else, what your peers might think of something and all of that. And I never actually interacted with anyone actually studying there at the time. So it was just, me, one kid, bhandar of films at my disposal, and I was watching like a maniac. And so that's kind of when I fell in love. I can't recall like this grand moment where a film flicked a switch in me. Like with books, I kind of can, interestingly. Like my dad had thousands of books at home. Again, incredibly lucky, as you can make out in my childhood, to have access to all of this. And so I used to read all the standard stuff that kids read, your Enid Blyton and On to Woodhouse and all of that.
Hmm.
And then one day I found this modern library edition of a book by Dostoevsky called The House of the Dead. And I was 10 at the time. So for a 10-year-old, hey, it's like House of the Dead. This must be fun. So I picked it up. And it was a book written by Dostoevsky about his time in a Siberian prison. And it just blew me away, right? Because that's when that switch flicks, where you know that there is something more than stories, that something else is happening to you, that you can relate to it all in a different way. And that became my sort of gateway to serious literature, where I just read voraciously. So by the time I therefore came to films, came to world films, what those kind of movies were trying to do was not new to me, because I had read all these books, and I kind of got it. I may not have had the vocabulary to really, express it in those terms and talk about the human condition and all of that, but
Mm.
I kind of got it. And my early favorite, and this is interesting, and it's a question I'll throw back at you also, which is that I realize that very often when we are young, and we are discovering a director, for example, there's a film that's a gateway film for us into their work,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that gateway
Right.
film then becomes something that is a dear favorite of yours. And later on, when you look back, you realize that there might be other films which are greater, or which are considered, more whatever. But those gateway films spoke to you. So
Yeah.
as that young adolescent boy or a teenager, the sort of films which, like, my gateway into Fellini was this film called Evitaloni, which is one of his early
Okay.
films. It's about a bunch of uh, young men in this town called Rimini. I think it must have been made in the late 1950s, and it's almost a coming of age story, but it's about a transition between carefree adolescence and actually coming to terms with adulthood, falling in love, all that kind of thing. And
Mm.
I'm actually, I don't think I've seen it in the last 25-30 years, but it moved me deeply when I saw it. And
Mm.
today, of course, when you talk about Fellini, not so many people will talk about Evitaloni. They'll talk about Eight and a Half and La Strada and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that made a sort of a deep impact on me. Similarly, with Shotyajit Ray, it wasn't the Apu trilogy which made an impact on me. It was this film called Pratidwandi, which
Mm.
is one of the
Correct.
films in the Calcutta trilogy,
Yeah.
which is about a young rebellious man looking for a job. And I must have seen it when I was 16 or 17, and I'm also young and rebellious, and not looking for a job, but young and rebellious. You have that angst without having a reason to have angst. You're a rebel without a cause.
Mm.
And that film spoke that film again spoke to me, when you have these sort of stereotypes of people will talk of the three great Bengali directors and say Ray was a conservative Bhadralok, and Ghatak was a radical, and Mrinal Sen was sort of the progressive. And actually that is far from true, especially if you watch films like the Calcutta trilogy, Pratidwandi, Shima Badho, and John Arano. And they're political, they're filled with anger, they're filled with
Mm.
sharp observations. I- so those were interestingly two of the two gateway films, two great directors,
Mm.
which won't it's just you watch them at a particular point in time where you are that much more receptive to them. So have you
Mm.
have you guys also kind of been through that? Like, what has been, tell me about your gateway drugs.
Oh, our gateway drugs are nowhere near as as cool, but honestly, for me, what got me to sort of love cinema was at a very young age, and I got obsessed with films without actually knowing that I will ever pick this up as a career. In fact, I surprisingly late in life I decided to do this around 12th grade. But when I was a very young kid, I used to watch pretty much everything on TV. I just watch everything. And one of the things that my family had recently bought a VCR when I was about 4 or 5 or something, and we had only one English film on it, which was Home Alone 2. And I have watched that about a million times. I don't know how many times I've seen it. Even now, like, I feel like it is so buried in my subconscious
Yeah.
that I sort of hope that someday somebody breaks into my house. Like, I just really want to just mess with somebody like that. And like, I still, like, if it's playing on TV, I can tell you, oh, this is the next dialogue. That, like, it's still burned into my brain. So for me, it was just in terms of formative years, in terms of loving cinema, it was that was that for me. Of course, later on when you're older, when we were when Bharat and I were around 14, 15, when I started discovering cinema, thanks to good internet that had just come in around 2007, 8, and torrents, of course. So with that, I sort of, my first foray into learning about cinema is super cliched. I went to like IMDb top 250, which everyone did when we were like I was in
Yeah.
8th grade, and I just sort of got a printout of it. Um, and by the time I was like, I think within the next 2-3 months, I was done with almost all of them. So I just started digging deeper and deeper. And for me, honestly, what was unavoidable at the time was in 2008-9, that whole period was a sort of resurgence of Bollywood was happening, where a new wave of directors, of course, the Dibakar Banerjees and Anurag Kashyap and Sriram Raghavan and also. For me personally, it was Johnny Gaddar and Love, Sex or Dhoka especially, and of course Wasepur, because Wasepur has to be there for everybody who's of our generation. So those are the sort of things that got at least me really hooked onto this idea that cinema is something more than what we know it to be. But yeah, I had a very conventional journey that way. But yeah, Bharat, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, for हमारे generation के लिए ना, for that period of kids, it was pretty straightforward because, as you mentioned, torrents were coming in. These guys were supposed to be super cool, right? Kashyap was cool, and I remember at that time, no smoking had released, or it was being talked about. So no smoking was like the coolest film ever made, right? So, and you had these shots of which could mean anything, and even to this date, you could make it appear to mean anything. So I remember no smoking was like a huge craze, and there's a scene in that which we used to like laugh at, where these guys are smoking in the bathroom, right? And the father comes in and starts talking about sex education, and he's like, "Tum log," he assumes that these guys are sleeping, right? These two boys. So he's talking about homosexuality to these boys, and then he says, "Papa, hum cigarette pee rahe the." So that was, so those kind of moments are again burnt into my memory from those kind of films. I think in terms of Hollywood, for a lot of us, again, it was Nolan, right? Who, at least for me, I remember when Ghajini released, people were talking about how it's copied from this movie called Memento, and at that point of time, having watched the original was like this cool thing for me. Oh, you guys like Ghajini? I've seen the original. Okay, it's 100 times better. It's just way better. So I think Memento is still a film that I feel is my favorite Nolan film to this date. And at that time, like I would make like I had these insane theories about the movie, about how it's about the condition of man, how it's linked to man's destiny, about what you cannot remember, you cannot be, or whatever, all of that.
The journey of a Nolan fanboy is a separate journey from
Yes.
the on the ring. But just to continue
Yeah.
from that point, just to like, for the two of us, I know I can speak for both Bharat and me, which is when we went to college, and our college, we were very fortunate because we came from this, again, very conventional idea of Kashyap, Dibakar Banerjee, Nolan, Tarantino, all that cool stuff. And we went to college, and because we were doing a film specific course, we were screened almost one or two films a year, at least one,
Yeah.
sometimes even more. So, and that is where we actually started watching. We went through the whole palette of NFDC and the whole 80s parallel cinema movement, along with old Hollywood, then the new Hollywood, then the silence, and there was a
Yeah.
professor who taught us sort of film appreciation from German expressionism onwards, and all of that. So our journey has been mainly shaped very, very tailor-made by our college. And just to come back to you about that, because I want to stress on the FTI part a little bit. Did FTI rub off at all? Like, did it give you a desire to sort of, because you were a pretty young boy in this this campus where everyone has sort of lofty ideas about cinema and all of that. So did that rub off on you? Did you ever want to make films yourself?
So FTI didn't rub off on me at all. because I didn't interact with the students, I didn't go to campus and all of that, so it didn't rub off on me at all. But watching film certainly did. Like my earliest ambition was probably to be a writer, but then right after that, it was to be a filmmaker. So I would,
Oh,
write little bits of screenplay. I'd, imagine I'd play my own films in my head and all of that, and that was very much something I wanted to do. But this was 1980s, so by the time one reaches the 90s and you're thinking about what to do with your life, I figured that no, making films requires other people, right? If I want to write, I can just sit down and write a book, right?
yeah.
Or I can write whatever the hell I want. Making films requires other people, much more so true there at that time than it is today.
Hmm.
And yeah, and I was just introverted. I didn't want to kind of develop those kind of social skills. There's a saying by Jean-Paul Sartre, hell is other people. So that kind of summed up where I was. So I thought, ki, theek hai, abhi, let's not pursue this actively in any way. I'll just do my writing and whatever. And, I mean, as long as you're doing what you're passionate about, it doesn't matter which of your passions you pick, I guess, in that sense. But I got to tell you an interesting story, since you said that when you used to be introduced to all these cinemas and your college would play them for you. So I did a BA in literature in Ferguson College, Pune.
Oh,
And so one year what happened was, and I used to go to archives all the time and watch all the films whenever they had all of that, the film archives on Law College Road. So once I took the initiative and I decided to organize a film festival for the people of Ferguson College, right, within the college. So I said, "ठीक है, करते हैं." Now what happened is every 2 years or so they'd have a film festival in Ferguson,
hmm.
and they'd show the same set of cliched films, with like Bicycle Thief, right? So
Yeah.
Bicycle Thief by
Correct.
Desika was like a staple favorite. Everybody would come. There were people who had seen it 8 times, especially teachers and all that. So that was the scene. So I said, कि it's a great film, but मुझे वो cliched films नहीं दिखाना है. मैं अपना curate करूँगा and I'll make my notes and all of that. So one of the films I showed was Ohazad Balthazar, which is Robert Bresson's film.
Oh,
And
Right.
Bresson, of course, Bresson is, his school of filmmaking at the time was known as quintessentialism. And essentially, they're very slow films. They're kind of very quiet. And Ohazad Balthazar was about a donkey. And it's one of those films where really not much happens at all. So I think about 11 people showed up to watch the film, and 2 of them were there at the end. And then the next day, the principal comes to me and he says, "Ki, you know what, Amit? I think you should have shown Bicycle Thief." So, so but yeah, so that's, but yeah, to answer to good to answer your question again, yeah, I always did want to be a filmmaker, but it was just a question of where is the least friction. And as someone who wants to
Hmm.
write books and whatever, there's very little friction there in terms of sitting down and doing it. While with filmmaking, you're dependent on other people. You have to do, you have to have those skills to navigate your way through what appeared to me from a distance to be a complex and messy world. So yeah, that's why, I mean, if I was 15 today, if I was 15 years old today, it would be so much easier because everything has changed so dramatically. But at the time, that's how I felt.
Yeah, and Bharat, I think this is a good segue for you to ask what you wanted to ask, Amit. I know that for a fact. So because of how much things have changed,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, what I wanted to ask you was that we are living currently in the world of content, right? There's content being made and consumed everywhere because of the internet boom and whatever. So it's simultaneously, I believe, easier and tougher than before to be in the industry because it's easier because there's just so much more work being done and there's so much more places that you could be even if you're not great at your job and you're still honing your craft. I would assume that earlier on you had less of that. You had less opportunity and you had less opportunity to fail. But since you've grown up, I guess a good decade and a half before us, and you've been part of the industry in different, roles. So, what do you think about this? How do you think is the the media landscape or this world has it become easier? Has it become tougher? How different is it from today? And what do you think?
I think it's become massively easier and massively better. In fact,
Okay.
about this, there is really no flip side to it. It's just become better in a number of ways, and these hold across the creator economy. One is that you don't have to go through gatekeepers anyway to do your work. So whether you're a writer or a musician or whatever, those gatekeepers don't matter. The means of production are in your hand. You can do uh, whatever the hell you want. Even for a young filmmaker, you can hone your skills just doing stuff on YouTube, maybe
Yeah.
vlogging on YouTube and doing stuff on YouTube. So a lot of what you sort of a lot of the learning process comes from doing, right? So guys like Spielberg will start off, they'll take a camcorder, they'll shoot a small film, then they'll shoot another. They're doing, you learn by doing. It is
Yeah.
much easier to get into the doing today because all that technology is really cheap and available, and you can put it out there, and the doing part of it is sort of much easier. Also, what is interesting to note is that you have more versatility in terms of form. Like if you think about forms in all artistic mediums, they are shaped by physical limitations, right?
Yeah.
So why is a book a particular size, and why is there a ceiling to it? It can't be more than this. And it can't be more than a certain amount because of the limitations of the printing press and how much you can actually print.
Yeah.
It can't be less than a certain amount because then it's not viable enough for the bookseller to package it and sell it at the prices that will make them profits. Similarly, why is a song 3 minutes? Because at the turn of the 20th century, the first disc that was made could hold 3 minutes. Then later, the first long playing record could hold 40 minutes. So that became the default length of the album. And your radio would still play 3 minutes. So you had the cliche of the 3 minute pop song out there. Similarly, with the printed word, you have newspapers which are a particular way, which print a particular amount of news, and therefore within that 800 word piece emerges as the optimal length or the longest length, for example, that you'll get for an opinion piece. Books are a certain length, articles are a certain length. Now what's happened, and this is true of cinema also, that if you're thinking Hollywood, you're thinking 90 minutes, Bollywood 180 minutes, whatever it is. If you're going to make something for television, 24 minutes, and then the remaining 6 minutes are commercial breaks. So these forms are fixed. And the problem with forms being fixed is that when you think in terms of fixed forms, you restrict the kind of content you can do. Like on the one hand, a constraint is great. You need constraints. There are guardrails and you do all your creativity within that. But then everything that you do, you are force fitting it into an existing form. You don't have a choice. You can't stretch out. Like if you just, for example, look at cinema, a 3 hour film is equal to a short story in terms of literature. Right, you'll basically have one broad linear line. You might have little side plots, but not too much of it. You can't meander and wander too much and all that. Now, when the web series happens, like for example, The Wire, which is my favorite series of all time, and it is so incredibly novelistic in the
Yeah.
sense that it is not
Yes.
about one character or two characters or three characters. You've got 16, 17 people who've got well defined interior lives, which are constantly, you're going deeper and deeper into them. And there's no hurry to tell the story like there would be in a 3 hour film or whatever. Everything proceeds at a particular leisurely pace and all of that. So just in terms of thinking beyond cinema, even there's that you can stretch out in that way and think in those terms. And also just in terms of short content, you can make something that is 2 minutes long and put it on YouTube or Vimeo or wherever. You have the initiative to kind of learn without anyone giving you an opportunity. You don't need that permission anymore. You can take your cell phone and say, I'm a filmmaker and I'm going to make films, and just get down to it. So in that sense, and that's true, that's happened across the creator economy. Like for example, in writing, I was one of the early bloggers in the early
Yeah.
2000s, and blogging did that in the context of writing, where you're no longer have to write 800 words. You can write 80 words, you can write 8,000 words, you can do whatever the hell you want. When India Uncut was really popular and at its peak between 2003 and 2008, I did an average of 5 posts a day. So I did some 8,000 posts in that
Hmm.
time. There was
Oh.
one day where I posted 70, I had 17 posts, right? And what's
Oh.
that doing, right? Forget the quality of it or whatever, but what that's doing is that you're constantly out there creating. So I'm using my writing muscle again and again and again because it costs me nothing apart from the time I put into it. But when you're young, time is cheap. So so that's sort of the miraculous thing. And what has also happened, I think, in the last few years is that creators now have the ability to build communities around their work and to monetize it. monetize it directly from the community, where you don't anymore have to go to a platform and say, hey, please carry my thing, and then they accumulate eyeballs and they sell it for advertising, and you get a tiny chunk of that. That's changed. That's completely changed. But that's changed for, say, print. That's changed to some extent maybe for podcasts and so on. It's not changed for films yet. But when I see the debates about Netflix doing badly and all that, I mean, one, of course, I think, being sort of a closed ecosystem, I don't think is really workable in the long run. So I don't know where that is going, but in across all other fields like media and and even sort of the concept of nation states, I see the mainstream dying out. I see this fast decentralization. I think in the audiovisual medium, it is still a little bit slower. I think the means of production got much cheaper a while back, but the means of distribution were a restraint. And if you think about it, think about the means of distribution when I talk about form and content. That, typically how films were distributed is that you have a big theater that houses so many people, and all these people are going there, and it's a single screen. And therefore, you have to cater to the lowest common denominator if you want to be commercial, right? You can't look for a niche. You got to be broad and not deep, right? And that's your constraint, and it's a physical constraint. Then multiplexes open up, and that opens up the possibility that, hey, they're smaller theaters, your bar for reaching profitability is lower. At the same time, the cost of production is going down, so maybe smaller independent films can also become viable. But and with web series and all that, there are further ways. So I don't know what the future holds. I think there are unknown unknowns, but honestly, I think we are on the cusp of big disruptive changes, and the way people watch cinema, however you define cinema, will be completely different 10 years later in ways that we can't imagine, and in ways that will be great, because it'll be so empowering for people like all of us. What are your thoughts on this?
No, absolutely, I agree, and we have no choice but to agree. I mean, the conversation we're having right now in front of people, for us to access a large group of people, potentially a large group of people at least, would we would have to be platformed by somebody. There would be standards and practices. There would be, you couldn't say certain things, you could only say certain things. So yeah, I mean, on that front, it's definitely it's great, and there's so much to unpack in what you. Sorry, Bharat, you were saying something.
No, I mean, I had a slightly different opinion. I mean, first of all, I'm so much into the creation aspect of it that I do not have like a larger perspective on this. I'm so much more invested right now in the craft or honing my skills as a storyteller and all that. I do not have like a larger view on this, but I do agree that there doesn't seem to be a way to predict change for the next, let's say, 10, 15, 20 years. Because if you look back 10, 15 years, you could not have predicted what's happened today, right? So just the same way, I don't think, we can say, or anybody who will say that, agle 20 saal mein ye hoga with any amount of confidence is basically not, basically not lying, but I think is misleading.
Totally honest.
Yeah. That's what I think.
I also sort of unrelated to what we were just talking about, but I heard you mention The Wire, and The Wire is something that I feel like it is for everyone to watch, just to get a better understanding of society and politics, and not to judge too quickly, because it's one of those shows where you sort of, at the deeper you with every season, I think that every season also structured in a way where it's like talking about one part of society. So I want to know your thoughts elaborate on your thoughts on The Wire, because that's a great show. So
I mean, at one level, it's novelistic in that sense that you're giving, it's sprawling. You're giving space for multiple characters to actually become people with rich interior lives, and you start caring for all of them, and you start following them, and you're just embedded in their dramas. It does another thing, which is which all great web series do, which comes from the form of it. Let's see, if I watch, say, a 3-minute clip of something on my mobile phone on YouTube, the depth which I relate, the engagement that I have is limited. it is just a little bit. I watch, say, a 1 hour series, a 1 hour one-off show, a one-off film, say a 1 hour film. My engagement is a little more than that, but is still kind of limited. I watch one movie, it's better, but still not quite there. With something like The Wire, you're really sinking into it. You're going deep, right? So the engagement is incredibly high. And what is also helped by that is the way in which it is made, right? For example, one of the aspects of the film is that the only music you'll hear in The Wire is what is being played in the scene. So two people are
Yes.
driving in a car and there's something playing, you're hearing that, but that's it. And there's nothing else. And otherwise, it's very naturalistic. It's like you're there. You're not being spoon fed what to think, that there's a sad scene, so there's sad music, or all of that shit which Bollywood does, where they're spoon feeding you all the time. And I absolutely hate that. So here, you're not being spoon fed. Things are just unfolding with you. You feel that much more engagement with the characters. You might even feel that they're friends of yours, that you know them intimately at a level that's higher than anything else. So it gets these two things simultaneously right, that it uses the advantage of the form to really stretch out and not limit itself, or not limit what it can do with the story. And at the same time, it's made in this naturalistic way where it's not forcing itself, where it is not like a contrived packaged piece of storytelling. It allows you to kind of seep into it, like in much the same way that a long form podcast like mine does. For example, like I had done a 4.5 hour conversation with Abhinandan Sekri, and someone later said, and I love this comment, and I get similar comments all the time, that I felt so much like I'm sitting on a sofa chatting with two friends, that at one point I interrupted you before realizing I'm not there. Right? And what's happening there is that it's a kind of intimacy, and it's a kind of intimacy that you see more and more with modern content. Like back in the day, who are the creators you're following? They are larger than life. You will build a temple for Amitabh Bachchan. Rajesh Khanna comes out of his house, 40 women will faint. They're incredibly larger than life. Whereas today, modern creators are like, you can go and just slap him in the back and say, "Kaisa hai bhai, kya chal raha hai?" Not exactly, but you get it.
Don't do that, guys. Don't.
Yeah. So which is great. I love it. And to an extent, a happy beneficiary of this. But what you then also see is that those are the kind of films where I really like, where you're no longer sort of speaking to that large crowd in an auditorium. You're speaking to one person sitting alone on his laptop, or watching, or sitting on his living room and just watching while having a cup of coffee, or smoking up, or whatever. So that kind of immersion is huge, and that kind of immersion partly depends on the form. You can't do it in 20 minutes. You can, however, do it in a much longer sort of and another web series that very underrated and comes to mind, and I'll talk about it and throw a question to you. And I discovered this series called Easy. Have you guys
Okay.
seen it?
I
Yeah,
watched, I think, one season of it.
yeah. So Easy is directed by this guy called Joe Swanberg, one of the pioneers of this genre called mumblecore. And I joke with a friend of mine about there being a Warsaw mumblecore, but I don't think there is, sadly, or I would join it. And it's a series about life in Chicago, right? So your first season, you have different episodes are kind of connected, in the sense some characters are common, they show up once in a while, but there's nothing really happening. The stories aren't dramatic. You watch those, it's not like there is conflict and then the conflict
Yeah,
gets
no.
resolved and all of that. Nothing. It's sort of the texture of everyday life unfolding itself, and is riveting and is beautiful. And these are people just like you or me, and what's happening could be happening right in front of me, except I'm
Yeah.
not in Chicago, but you get what I'm saying. So and that's beautiful, and that really sort of works for me. And so my question is, so I discovered Easy when I through a really nice piece in the New Yorker written on it by Richard Brody, right? So it is an example of a web series I discovered through a critic. I'll talk later about a film I discovered through a critic, but here's a great example of a web series I discovered through a critic. And I'd like to ask you guys about what are your favorite discoveries that you've made by reading about something and saying, fuck, I have to watch this. And then when you watch it, you realize that, fuck, this is as good, if not better than, what you read.
I think for I'm I don't know if I can speak for Aditya, but for a lot of us in college, it was these, we had these film appreciation classes. So we had this professor called Mr. Ajit Dwara, and he basically would just sit us down and make us watch these movies from like disparate sort of movements. So there was Iranian cinema, there was I remember German expressionism, and he would just open the house at the end of it, and he'd be like, "What do you guys think? What is this film about?" And with very abstract films, that would be a very interesting question to answer, because what is this film about, right? But I remember there was this movie called Taste of Cherry,
Correct.
uh, which we watched, and I think half of us fell asleep, and then we woke up, and then we fell asleep again. So it was a whole journey in itself. So when I remember waking up and the class ended, and he's like, "What do you think it was about?" Everybody was sort of in this dreamlike haze already, but we were also fascinated because it was a very interesting collection of shots put together, and and then he showed us an interview of the director where the director is saying, he said, "You guys fell asleep, right?" And we're like, "Yeah, we did." And he said, "That's the intention. The director wants to merge your dream world and the world of his film, and he wants to create something interesting out of it." So at that point, I was kind of like, my mind was blown, because I had thought of cinema as a visual medium, as an audio medium, but definitely not as a dream medium, right? So for me, that was one film and one filmmaker and one classroom where I was a changed person viewing films. So that was my.
For me, there was, in fact, I would just to, I have was talking about the same professor. In fact, it's very interesting. He also sort of broke the form in our college, because what he would always request, he wasn't an in-house faculty. So he would always request for the last lectures of the day.
Yeah.
So he would always request for a 3-hour class.
Yeah.
And so the college was supposed to end at around 4:45, and they would run up till like 6:30. I've been like 7:30, people are ready to throw chairs at each other. No, this is not your analysis is shit. Like just really violent arguments. So it's very interesting. Even he went for depth over going broad. But for me, those there were two films actually. One is because I'm sort of both of them are sort of very personal to me, because I am a history nerd. So there's the director Sergei Bondarchuk, who made War and Peace, which is the more popular and the 7 hours product, is Waterloo, just about the Battle of Waterloo. And the way it's shot, and I had read about it. I had only read about it while I was reading, because I had clickbaited on some article, know about this 7.5 hour long film. And that from that I went to War and Peace, from that I went to Bondarchuk, from that I found out, he's made a film on the Battle of Waterloo. And then I had to sort of watch it. And ever since I watch it almost once every 6 months. And the best part, it's available on YouTube illegally completely, I'm sure, but just find Waterloo on YouTube and watch it, and I recommend it to everyone. So that was one of those. And the other one was because, again, this is also personal to me, because in college I was really into stand-up, because again, along with cinema, that was the time in India where stand-up comedy was still cool, sorry, but it but that was the point where it was sort of flourishing, and it was all like edgy and all that stuff. So I was really into that. And I remember reading, most people who are into comedy, and I had heard about Lenny Bruce, and this guy who had sort of died for, he was like the Jesus of comedy. He sort of died for everyone since. And I remember we were supposed to have that screening, but I didn't this film for a very long time. And one day I just walked into class and I saw this, and I turned to look at the projector, and it said Lenny, and I was like, oh my god, this is so. And that has been one of my favorite films since then. So Lenny and Waterloo were those for me, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, and what you said about Ajit Dwara, Bharat brought a memory flooding back, which also, in a sense, is leads to a part answer to your earlier question. So in the 90s, for a while, between 95 and 99, I worked in Channel V and MTV, switched between the two. So this must have been circa 95 or 96. And one of my colleagues in Channel V, where I was at the time, was this filmmaker called Shamin Desai, who sadly passed away. He made one film, I think, I think it was called Road Movie, I forget, but he
Oh,
passed away in his at 45 or something. And so Shameen would have been in his late 20s then, and the rest of us were 21, 22, or whatever. So one day he called us into the section of the office where the promos department was, and he puts his tape into the video cassette player, or maybe it was a DVD, I forget. And he said, "Okay, I want you to now forget everything else. Let's close the door. I want you to watch this." And he showed us Coppola's Rumblefish. And as he showed us
Oh yeah.
Coppola's Rumblefish, he gave this phenomenal lecture on the film also, about how it was made simultaneously while Coppola was shooting Outsiders. He took that same kind of cast and the same whatever, and he shot Rumblefish, but it's such a different film, and just the way that it's made. And it was such a learning experience in the sense that, one, passion is infectious, right?
mm,
So you see one guy passionate about something, you're catching a little bit of that. Two, you're looking at something in a way in which you wouldn't have seen it. If I just saw Rumblefish outside somewhere by myself,
yeah,
I
yeah,
would have seen none of those things. This guy
correct.
is turning something, it's like turning something pixelated into something high definition, the way he gives you insight on it. And the reason it answers your earlier question about changing times
Mm,
is that back in the day, there was never an ecosystem where that could take place. Now, I was extremely fortunate to be a 21-year-old in a place where you have people crazy about films and you get to see that. But otherwise, if you're, outside somewhere, you're in college somewhere, that ecosystem isn't there, right? Where people who are passionate about films can talk to other people who are passionate about films. Today you have that. Today you have something like Mami. Like, before COVID hit, my favorite part of every year was Mami.
yeah,
That was
dude.
my vacation.
Same.
I didn't have
Absolutely.
to go out of Bombay. I had to go to Mami. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
you watch your 3 4 films a day. You optimize to watch as many as you
yeah,
can, and it's just mind blowing. It's so beautiful, right? And you have
yeah.
that ecosystem where you have these people, whether they're your peers, whether they're people you're working with, you have so much more talk about cinema, so much more passion being shared. And of course, I'm not directly plugged into any of those communities, but it's stuff, I kind of live in the neighborhood in Four
Mm,
Bungalows, so I kind of see that around me. And you're so fortunate to have that, because back in the day, who do you like, if you listen to a great song by a band which is not already there in the mainstream, not one of the 10 bands every Indian listens to,
yeah.
then where do you get more music by them? How do you find someone who also cares for that band? How do you find out more about them also? There
Mm,
is nothing, there is no internet. Just putting a mixtape together was sort of such a big deal back in that time. So, yeah, I mean, all of these things also matter, that the three of us, even if this wasn't on YouTube and we were, the fact that we could still get together and have this conversation, that's magic.
mm.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah,
boomer.
that's true. And there was so just a counter sort of this thing, because I do notice one thing. For example, I just to hark back to Wire for a second, where the creator of the Wire, David Simon, he was a journalist in Baltimore for, like, I believe
Mm,
around 15-20 years, and he sort of went through the whole ringer, and he kind of understood that world entirely. Do you think there is, I mean, I get that everything is a little easier to sort of pump out now, but as somebody who works in the industry a little bit right now, at least in India, I don't know in America or other places, but it's kind of hard to go deep. Like, people are not as willing to go
yeah,
or spend
yeah.
time, because it's much easier. Almost as many people will watch it. It's much easier to produce all of that. Do you think that is what? Because, for example, for the same reason that there is no dedicated parallel cinema industry, which might be for other reasons, I don't know that, but um like, do you see that as a problem at all, or do you see that it'll self correct at some
I
point?
also want to add to that. In fact, uh, there's this very viral sort of right now. There's a viral Instagram post which everybody's sharing, which is about short content creation. Right, that today you'll have a lot of people say, especially content creators, will say, short format content is the new thing and it's selling, and reels and all of that. That really doesn't allow for going deep, or even go experiment with that form. For example, a show like Patal Lok is such a difference, like such a different kind of experience than the others, is because it has taken the luxury to really sink its teeth into that universe, that world, and take the time to sort of go there. I what I see as a, you know, as a problem of our times is that content creation has become much shorter, uh, especially in the industry that I'm a part of. So what do you think about that?
Yeah. Two great questions. So as far as the first one is concerned, I agree. I mean, you look at David Simon, he's got these decades of experience as a journalist. He
Mm.
wrote that great book, I forget what it was called, but he wrote it, I think, around circa 1990. And that got made into a TV series after that. And then The Wire came along and all of that. So he's had that journey. I think one of the problems in India is that, and I'm seeing it from the outside, so I could be wrong and things could be getting better or whatever. But one of the things is that I see a lot of young people with not too much life experience, making work that is trying to look a particular way and feel a particular way, and perhaps, getting the slickness right and all of
Mm.
that, but very much shallow and on the surface and not kind of going any deeper. And this is not the fault of those individuals necessarily. It is just that if you're really young, maybe. So where are the David Simons of today is the question that I would ask. And the point is, there are no doubt, people with that kind of experience and ability around, except that they've never felt attracted to the world of entertainment here because it is so non-serious and so fluffy and so shady, and they've never been attracted to it so far. And also, where would the scope for somebody like that be? Like, another issue that I see, and I hear about this from people, I have no personal experience obviously, is that and in fact, before I make this point, let me take you back to the 90s again. uh, in the 90s, after liberalization, all these multinationals started coming in, and a classic mistake they made was they thought India is Bollywood plus cricket and nothing else. So everything was Bollywood plus cricket. And what would happen, the journey they would make is, after a couple of years, they would realize that no, man, there's a lot else here. And even niches are big in absolute terms in India. So, they'd have a more nuanced approach to everything. And I thought, okay, multinationals have learned in general and they won't make that mistake again. But I see multinationals now coming in making the same mistake. Like, if you look at why Netflix succeeded in the US, it's because they subverted the freaking Hollywood system, right?
Mm.
And went beyond it and they challenged it and disrupted it. Here you have Netflix coming in and going straight to a Karan Johar and saying, hey, do this for us, going straight to all the standard filmy guys. And they're not the solution, they're the problem, right? And so that lack of imagination is an issue. Now, I don't know what the scene in Netflix is, but I saw kind of Spotify come in, Audible, Suno come in at a time wanting to do podcasts. And that was their approach, very celebrity obsessed,
Mm.
very Bollywood obsessed. And generally, the Indians who worked in those places were like 23, 24 years old, who had done education abroad and then had come through that. And you don't need that. You need local people who sort of understand a deeper scene than just what is happening in Bombay or what is happening in Bollywood, and who can also then think a little bit out of the box. And I realize the safest thing to do is what all these guys did. And I'm not even criticizing them. I might even be wrong. This is my perspective from the outside. Now, I
Mm.
think the way the scene will evolve really is that, one, even from within these, a lot of these young people are at least doing work and getting experience, and that's a damn good thing. So whenever they grow, whenever they have that life experience, whenever they have stories to tell, they will also have the tools to tell them. And that's a good thing, and that's going to take time.
Yeah.
But the ecosystem has to grow over a period of time, where has to grow over a period of time. And you know it's not easy. Like, you look at stand up, for example, right? The stand up ecosystem in the US is so deep. The culture is so widespread that anyone who gets to the top from there is by default very good, because your
Mm.
sample sizes are incredibly large. So
Yeah.
anyone who comes up to the top is by default very good at whatever they do, whether you may not, personal taste might determine whether you like them or not, but they're bloody good, they're the best. Here, for a long time, earlier on, the ecosystem was really small. So you didn't have that kind of quality rising to the top. Today, I think it's a little deeper, and you see better quality, it's less derivative, and so on and so forth. But there's a long way to go. So the ecosystem will kind of take a long time to go. But as someone who's been thinking about the creator economy in terms of freedom from platforms and gatekeepers and all that, at some point, I wish a version of that would also happen in terms of filmmaking and all of that. Like, it'll probably be the last to get there, but I'm certain at some point it will. And like you said, Bharat, we simply can't say what the industry will look like 10 years from now or
Yeah.
15 years from now. It's unknown unknowns. But I see this as a direction where the mainstream eventually crumbles, and where a really good filmmaker figures out a way to make movies and make money of it without necessarily having to kowtow to a big production company or a big distributor.
But Amit, that's also something that I do not know will happen, because if you remember the time when we were growing up, me and Aditya, in the early noughts or the late noughts, through the noughts, right? We had these very interesting new voices appearing, and we were talking like how we're talking right now. We were saying that, we're at the cusp of this new age Bollywood. There is Love, Sex and Dhoka. There is Sri Ram Raghavan on the horizon. There's Zoya Akhtar, Farhan Akhtar also. So at that time we had the same enthusiasm, and now we are at a point when we're still there. We're still
Cut to Karan Johar and Bombay Velvet.
Yeah,
So that's
exactly.
basically what happened.
I think see, what happens is that
Yeah.
I often say about creators, and I often say, and this is an old saying about forecasters, in fact, that they tend to overestimate the short term and underestimate the long term. And I think that the mistake we might have made 15 years ago is in overestimating the short term and thinking things will change really fast, and it doesn't happen that fast. But maybe in 2035, we could be amazed at, fuck, we were there and we are here. Wow. And that could happen, and I see that already as having happened in like other media in other domains. So I guess that's always a hope, but still, I mean, at least you have the opportunity to make stuff, to mingle with passionate people, and what more could you ask for?
I mean, that gives you a good place, a good point that I wanted to bounce off you, which is that currently there's a big sort of in fact, a very public battle going on between the languages in this country, which is especially concerning cinema. I'm sure you've been on Twitter and you know the whole
I know the
Ajay Devgan thing
I
that
I
happened.
only know the Hindi imposition nonsense that is happening. I don't know the film connection. Is there a film connection also?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, what happened is Ajay Devgan. I don't know. He saw some interview of Kicha Sudeep, who was in KGF, I believe, and I think I don't know the original interview, but he said something to the effect of, Hindi is not the only one now. Like as it was maybe 30, 40 years ago, if you had to make money, I think you said in your podcast as well, Rajnikant. Oh no, that was a Manu Joseph article. Sorry.
Okay.
I sort of crossfired. But yeah, Rajnikant had to come to sort of Bombay to make money, right? Like to become like a bigger star, or even other people like that. But what he sort of said was that nowadays it's not Bollywood's fiefdom in a sense. It's every other. If you make a great film, or if you make a big enough film, or if you appeal to everyone, people across the country will watch. And sort of, I think Ajay Devgan took it personally, and he said that Hindi is our national language, which is false. And he said that. And he basically went on to say that, a terrible argument, which was, why do they dub your movies in Hindi if you don't think Hindi is important? To which people were putting screenshots of his films being dubbed into Chinese and Mandarin and all that. So we're like, so what are we to make of this? So there's a lot of this friction going on in cinema right now, where sort of Bollywood is on the back foot. Bollywood or Hindi, whatever the semantics of it, but because turns out the biggest hits are often the ones that they remake. And as because of the pandemic, maybe, or because people have been watching a lot more stuff online, people are getting more used to watching things that are not dubbed, or even if they're dubbed, they're okay with watching the dubbed rather than a remake. And I can talk from my personal experience, like my family who would never otherwise watch cinema of other languages and stuff like that, but now they're open to it completely. In fact, even Parasite or something that helps out that kind of a thing. So I genuinely believe that there is within this friction, Bollywood, a constant sort of rant of ours on the podcast, that Bollywood has given up its ground. Like even the conventional Bollywood big film, which maybe you and I might not even enjoy that much, but would like objectively be considered, okay, it's a decent good film, it's a good experience, is not coming out that regularly. So I have no hope. Sorry, I forgot my question, but I have no hope from Bollywood. I lost it pretty long back.
Yeah, but I have no hope from Bollywood, but that's why I have hope, because the person who
Correct.
made this critique is absolutely right. And that's a really great point about Rajnikant having to come to Bombay, which he would not have to do today. I mean, even globally, you look at something like Squid Game becoming such a huge success, right? And it is, those guys didn't have to go to Hollywood and beg for work and be assistant directors somewhere and all of that shit before getting their big break. They made what they had to make, and it kind of worked out, which is great. The mainstream is crumbling everywhere. I mean, you talk of people like Ajay Devgan and all that. I mean, even if he's got a large audience now and whatever it is, the point is the films he makes today and the films he has made in the past will be 50 years later, they'll only be watched for anthropological interest, right? There's nothing else to that,
And to know the side effects of gutka, but yeah.
Yeah, and gutka, right? So so they're irrelevant. I mean, they don't know it yet, and the world doesn't, and they can kind of labor under that delusion that they're relevant. There's a great quote by Douglas Adams, which I think speaks to this moment. So if you let me search it out, I'll read it out, because
Sure.
I have never
Yeah.
thought of it before in the context of Ajay Devgan. But okay. So I have found it, and luckily my connection is fast enough. Having said that, okay. So Douglas Adams once wrote this, and this is a general comment on the human condition, but can apply to Bollywood also. Imagine a puddle waking up one morning and thinking, this is an interesting world I find myself in, an interesting hole I find myself in. Fits me rather neatly, doesn't it? In fact, it fits me staggeringly well. Must have been made to have me in it. This is such a powerful idea that as the sun rises in the sky and the air heats up, and as gradually the puddle gets smaller and smaller, is still frantically hanging on to the notion that everything's going to be all right because this world was meant to have him in it, was built to have him in it. So the moment he disappears catches him rather by surprise. I think this may be something we need to be on the watch out for. Stop code. And
That's
generally,
a great quote for this.
Yeah, and generally, I mean, whenever I quote this quote, it's in the context of human hubris, right? But Bollywood also, right? It applies.
It absolutely applies to Bollywood. I mean, yeah, for all the reasons that I said, they're losing their own market share within their own country. Forget like Hollywood losing out to Korea or whatever. This is like right next door, and it's their own fault. They never embraced it.
But I also
fully.
I also think that they're losing ground to terrible cinema, in the sense that what are they losing ground to, right? There is, in the current resurgence of like South Indian films, if I may use that term as an umbrella term, what are the movies that are, becoming the hits even in India, in the Hindi speaking belt, right? There is movies like Pushpa, there is RRR, there are all of these very super massy sort of movies, right? So I connecting to what you said, Aditya, that even if we weren't used to liking all of these big budget Bollywood films, there would still be an audience for it and who would root for it. Now they're losing that too, and I think that's kind of the beginning of the end, right?
I mean, they're not just losing, and in fact, along with that, and I want to ask you, Amit, because this is a super contentious topic, and we did a 1 hour podcast on this topic and we somehow got through it, which is they're not just losing out to other languages, but even within languages, there is only a certain kind of cinema that is soon we see that is getting acceptance, which is the Kashmir Files is recently released. So what do you make of all of this? I have you watched it? Have you not watched it?
I haven't watched it, so I won't comment on it, but I have read enough about it to have a sense of, I mean, I can see how that film is being weaponized and for what purposes. And so I don't even want to watch it, frankly. But nor do I want to pass any comment on its cinematic merits, because of course I haven't seen it. But I just despise the way that it's being weaponized, and and just part of the larger trend in our country of amplifying hate. So sorry, what was your question apart from this?
No, my question was, how do you look at it in terms of, it might get a lot worse that before it gets better, is what I'm trying to say. That it might not just lose ground to this and I'll just elaborate my question a little bit, which is that for all these years, Bollywood had this sense of whatever. It was a very Nehruvian kind of idea and a very conventional sort of Ganga Jamuni type of thing that Hindi cinema had. It was done very tackily, like all this while, but it was there. It was lip service, whatever. But now that sort of that Hindi cinema or Bollywood stands for something larger because so many people watch it, and it has such a pervasive sort of effect inside the country that do you see this as a problem, or do you think this is just a flashpoint because of one film and it'll pass, or do you see this as a continuing problem?
So thinking aloud, I'll answer it on two margins. And the first margin is what is happening in our society, where I think we are going downhill so fast. And I used to think it will get much worse before it gets better. Now I don't know if it will get better at all. Things are just getting really bad. I mean, we could spend a lot of time lamenting that, but it is what it is. There's no point. But the other margin on which I'm more hopeful is about cinema itself, right? Because there are so many young people like the two of you and all your friends and whatever, and everybody in Warsaw except me, who want to who want to kind of, who are passionate about what they're doing, whether it's in films or music or whatever, and are figuring out ways to do it. Now, here's the conundrum, and here's where films haven't reached the stage where other aspects of the creator economy have, in the sense that about more than a decade ago, Kevin Kelly wrote this great essay called "A Thousand True Fans," and his point was this: that before that, in the arts or in writing or whatever, you had to scale to be successful. So the top 2% in any field would be successful, and everybody else would be fighting to make a living, right? In the arts, so you had to scale. And his point was, you no longer need to scale. You can find 1,000 true fans, and you can make do on that. So the exact analogy he drew was, if you find 1,000 people who are willing to, who value you enough to give you $100 a year, that's $100,000, right? Now, which is enough money for anyone in India certainly to be perfectly satisfied. Now, that's actually happened more than a decade after he wrote it. If you look at Substack, for example, your standard Substack subscription is $100 a year or $10 a month, and then it becomes $100 a year. And you have tons of people who are actually making a healthy living, not making 100K a year, but millions and millions, right? People like Bill Bishop, a guy who writes on China, obscure subject, obscure guy. He writes on a particular facets of it, and otherwise may not have gotten that kind of platform or that kind of money, doing a great job with it. So in other fields like writing, you've gotten that. In other fields like YouTube, you've gotten that. Even podcasting, I would argue that we are pretty much there. In fact, there's a writer called Lee Jin, I think, who wrote this great essay called 100 True Fans, where she said that Kevin Kelly spoke of 1,000, but you can have 100 true fans who give you $1,000 a year and reach the same kind of this thing. So the lesson that people everywhere else are learning is that you don't need to scale. And because you don't need to scale, the gatekeeper doesn't matter. The means of production are in your hand. Now, I don't know how this translates to cinema. I don't know what those models are. I don't know what those ways of filtering content and viewing content would be. Is it possible for a filmmaker to make a film on a low budget and then not reach 1,000 people maybe, but reach more people like that, but then be, for the whole exercise to be viable enough that he does not then need to go to a gatekeeper or go to a platform and is not reliant on that. And at some point, it seems to me, given the way everything else has moved, it will happen. And I'm not saying it will happen in the short term because we overestimate the short term, but I'm pretty sure it will happen in the long run. And it's up to disruptors to then come in and say, okay, what kind of model do we build that this becomes possible, right? And that is a big question for me. But in the meantime, I think for the young creators out there, the point is you can do stuff. When I was 17 and I thought, hey, I want to make movies one day and this and that, I didn't have a canvas on which I could work. I wouldn't have known how to go about it or what to do or whatever, and so it was very easy to turn away and say, I'll do writing instead. And ultimately, I think a lot of skills in the creator economy are kind of transferable. If you're a creative person, you can do this and you can do that, and you shouldn't restrict yourself. But the point is, today it's different. So I'm excited about the fact that it's different. The means of production are in your hand. There is so much more work. There's a growing ecosystem. But that model hasn't yet emerged where you don't need anybody else. You don't need to make a Kashmir Files or an Ajay Devgan movie to get funding for something that you want to do. So, these are sort of my mixed rambling thoughts on it.
So like basically what, and I'm a big fan of news laundry as well. In fact, when in the beginning of this podcast, when I was talking about you partially so NL Hafta and Seen the Unseen are the reason why we do this podcast to begin with, because
Thank you.
we were like I used to obsessively listen to both, and then I have to do something, I have to like put this up. So yeah, we need a model like that for films, what news laundry is doing in their space for films. I don't know when or if that will happen. I mean, people already try crowdfunding and all that, but it's kind of wishy-washy on that front. But
no, but I'll tell you something interesting. Crowdfunding was wishy-washy. It need not be wishy-washy anymore, right? Like earlier, once upon a time, we used to think that asking for a buy me a coffee kind of thing, where people, voluntarily give you money. 10 years back, I would have said it's not going to work because there's too much friction. People aren't used to paying for things on the internet, all of that. But today it works. It works for me, right? Today, it actually does work. And if you look at what Brandon Sanderson just did, you're familiar with that, right? So Brandon Sanderson is this fantastic sci-fi fantasy writer who, during the lockdown, wrote 4 books. And then he did this YouTube video where he said that I don't want to give it to a conventional publisher. I want to build a club of my fans and I want to give it to those people. So only they will get it. And he had this subscription thing where you can get 1 book every 6 months and whatever and all of that. And I think he set some target on Kickstarter or whatever platform he was using. He set some target of 1 million. And eventually, when he was forced to stop it after a couple of weeks, he'd raised $45 million.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Right. I think that's the last I heard. It might even be more. You can just, search for Brandon Sanderson on YouTube and check that out. And he's, of course, an outlier author. He's absolutely huge. He's up there, right? So that's a different case. But the point is that I think in future, if somebody wants to sort of crowdsource a film and wants to raise money to do it, I think it'll become much more possible because more and more people are willing to actually give money on the one hand, and also it's become much cheaper on the other hand. Like so I remember I wrote this sort of shitty book in 2009, and for some reason Govind Nihalani came across it and he wanted to make a film of it. So we chatted for a while, and I did a little treatment for him as well, though I looking back, that book is embarrassing, so I don't know why but whatever, he saw something in it, he wanted to make it, and he couldn't get funding here. And then he said ki Amit, Marathi film banate hai, and this was circa 2009, and he said that the Marathi film industry today is where the Hindi film industry was in the early 1980s, the Arsatya days and all of that. So that was what he felt at the time, and he couldn't do that either. And the thing is that, and I'm just thinking this aloud right now, that today, if I was to kind of put out a call, or if a guy with, that eminence was to try and crowdsource money for a film, I think he would get it.
Absolutely.
There was a guest on my show. I won't name him. I did a 5-hour episode with him. And around the 5th hour, I said, are you working on something? And he said, yeah, I'm working on this project. Not a film, but just a different kind of project. And I said, if people want to support you, what should they do? So he said, oh, they can write to me here or whatever. He said, whatever. And in 3 days, he had $40,000.
Wow.
Right.
Oh my God.
So, and I would not have thought of this 2 years ago. If you told me this 2 years ago, I would have said, fuck off, you're bullshitting. People on the net aren't going to pay. Micropayments are a friction. We know they don't work. All that conventional thinking. But I think that's kind of changed. And one of the reasons it's also changed is that when a lot of the content is this kind of honest, intimate content which is coming out, then your viewers engage with it at a much deeper level. They start caring for your project. They start caring for what you do. It becomes personal, and therefore they are more willing to pay and to support you. There is a sense of ownership. Like on my show, sometimes I'll have 50, 60, 70 show notes where I basically give links to everything that is mentioned in the show. So once I remember I had a show with some 60 show notes, and 1 hour after the release, a listener wrote to me and said, hey, between 52 and 53, you missed this little thing that was mentioned. Right. So that's a kind of ownership that fans, that listeners take of your work. It belongs to them also. So I think all these, I see these possibilities magically opening, and, one should reconsider all our conventional thinking on this.
No, in fact, you've given me a great actually segue to go into Amit. We've recently started our Buy Me a Coffee and our YouTube memberships. So thank you for saying all of these things. And in fact, that's true. I had a very hard time convincing the man to my left, Bharat, that we will that just trust me. So what we essentially did is we made like a WhatsApp group of very early on, like when we didn't even have like whatever 1,000 subscribers. We had like probably maybe 50, 60 people used to listen to us, and we sort of made a WhatsApp group of everyone who used to listen to us back then. And that group is around like around 10 or 15 people from back then joined, and then slowly some people trickled in. And then because the conversations on that WhatsApp group are on all the time, and we are always talking about it, we get half our like episode ideas from there.
Yeah.
So we end up talking about it on the show. And because of that, I have been getting so many mails or so many DMs saying that, hey, can we be a part of this WhatsApp group? So we kind of started to paywall it, and we're not charging anything. We just said that, hey, you guys are friends now. So
Yeah,
but
all
the
the
people,
existing people.
yeah. So we have recently started a Buy Me a Coffee page there are 2 tiers of memberships and a YouTube membership, so you guys can check that out. If you like this podcast, support us, and you can be part of it if you want to hear us talk about films or anything else also. But yeah, thank you for giving me that plug point. Yeah, sorry.
I wanted to actually ask you something separate. In fact, we touched upon it and then we moved on. So this is regarding the present day political atmosphere, right? We all, especially in the kind of echo chambers that me and Aditya are a part of, we're always hearing, and especially people who have been born after like the mid 90s or in the mid 90s, we always have the sense that this is the worst time in Indian history or post independence. Now, I wanted to ask you, because you've grown up in a different era, right? Not era, but like a different decade. So, do you agree with this when or do you think this is a hyperbole? That, oh, we are living in the worst times right now in terms of the political climate of the country and it's gone to shit. What is your take on this? Do you think this is like this is a hyperbole, or is this actually happening?
I mean, there's a two-part answer. There's a yes and a no, but I'll focus more on the yes, which is that in terms of the hate that is being spread on society being torn apart, on the anti-Muslim sentiment that has just become so widespread, this is the worst. It has become
Really?
really bad, and I fear for what will happen. And on this margin, it's really bad, and it's getting worse, and it's not hyperbole. In fact, we might not be seeing enough of it from our bubbles in our cities, wherever we are, but it's terrible. Having said that, I think these sentiments, bigotry, all of that has always existed in Indian society. It is just that politics has now caught up with it and amplified it. And therefore, I think we are in a particularly bad place. On other margins, we are kind of better. Like economically, obviously, we are better than in the heyday of Indira Gandhi's time, like obviously. But that's not the thing to focus on right now. And even economically, in the last 10 years, we've, really just, our golden years were really between 91 and 2011. And like I've had just so many episodes, kind of on this and all of that. But since then, we've just kind of gone down, and it's going down there as well. But the thing with the economy is, you have one policy today, you can have another policy tomorrow, things can turn around, that shit can happen. And economics has real humanitarian consequences. So some of the disasters of this government, like demonetization and the botched implementation of GST, they've had humanitarian consequences. They've driven people back into poverty, and it's pretty bad. But the area which I'm really worried about is just a communalization of everything, and the way that society, politics are both on the same page, and they have the oppressive state to use as they will. Like Shah Rukh Khan's son being, what happened to him last year, which is really, part of it is just sending a message that you guys better know your place. And especially right now, at the time we are recording, it's like every day, boss, there is something or the other that is happening. And I've just recorded an episode with Hussein Hedri, who did that great poem Hindustani Musalman, that will be out on Monday. and we talk about it a bit as well, and we were chatting about it off the record as well. And yeah, it's horrendous, but the point is, the thing is, when you think about what you as a citizen can do, I think the question is, on what margins can you fight this? And if you're an artist, I think the answer to bad art is always good art. Somebody makes a Kashmir Files, fine, it is, it's doing what it's doing. And I'm not referring to it, I don't know its artistic merit, I haven't seen it. I'm talking about how it's being weaponized as part of this campaign of hate. But the point is that let us go beyond bemoaning it. Let's make our own stuff. Let's put our own stuff out there. Like, I was a big fan of TikTok when it came out. It broke my heart when it was banned. And there was so much on TikTok that gave me a lot of hope, because there were so many people who were expressing dissent in really creative ways. And and TikTok also, and coming together with Geo suddenly taking broadband everywhere, TikTok really decentralized access to the creation of art, where you could be from a marginalized community, or you could be of an alternate sexuality in a small village, and you could feel like, shit, I'm all alone in the world and there's no one like me and I'm a freak, or whatever. You could feel whatever. And then you can turn on TikTok and see so many people like you just creating great art. And some of it was great art, some of it is your typical TikTok stuff, but it was really reaching a great level. And then, and this is a magic, you can turn that camera back on yourself and you can do something with it. And you can initially start with lip syncing to popular memes and all that, but then you can go beyond that. And it's a beyond that blew my mind. And just as that was starting to burgeon, these guys blocked TikTok, because that's the only thing they can do against China. So anyway, I'm sorry for this rant, but it just makes me so angry that TikTok was taken away.
Yeah, so do I actually. It was.
What do you guys feel
about the country?
I mean, I agree with every word. I agree that we are, at least again, in my lifetime, this really is the worst when it comes to communalization and hatred and all of that. And I mean, it's like it's saying this has become a commonplace, which is sad to begin with, right? This is not something new that I'm saying. I've said this, we've been saying this for the past few years now. So it's that bad. It's that obviously bad.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the tether, like I'm on the what do you call it, end of my tether of with like family members, man, like people who I know since, like, and it's so I mean, it comes out of nowhere, you're 1 minute you're talking about something completely pleasant, and then suddenly it's just like outright hate, and just it's and you don't know where this came from, like people all this while, which really makes you think, right? Were they always like this? Were people were And then, as you said, like, which I think you said on your podcast also plenty of times, which is, the founders of our country sort of were these elite who sort of imposed their own progressive ideals on a regressive country. So I mean, day by day we realize that is sort of true. And in fact, why I was talking about the whole Bollywood aspect of it is because I feel like it, and Bharat and I kind of talk about this privately, which is that the way that this government has been capturing institutions, whether they be government institutions or private ones, which operate in their own sort of private ecosystem, whether it's the media is, I mean, a complete capture at this point. I mean, you can't watch a TV channel without wanting to vomit, so like, and it's very clear, it's very obvious with these guys that the next step is Bollywood, that the next is, or it's almost halfway there. And it really makes you sort of, because just for example, I was talking to my parents, and thankfully my parents are not are not on that zone, but I was back in the day when there were, like, say there was a communal riot, or there were these things that used to happen, you would have, like, it was almost a norm, big politicians, big movie stars would come, they would do some song and dance, and they would do like a little appeal to peace, and that is completely gone now. It's in fact, they're the ones stoking it half the time. So I mean, I'm actually like scared for my Muslim friends, or people who, even not even those, just like I have friends who are journalists, who are like people who graduate with us, who are journalists, who are working, and they tell us scary stories. So it's just scary. I don't know how else to put it, really. So
I mean, again, coming back to what you only said, that there was a time when Bollywood was very cringe, in a very cringe-worthy manner, but still secular. You know, they would say things like these things like Hindu Muslim bhai bhai ya sab hum sab ek hain and all of that. While these might seem very obvious statements, that also is being taken away. So
See,
that
I'll add this. There is that old Bob Dylan quote: "If you ain't got nothing, you got nothing to lose." Right? And a lot of people in Bollywood will not speak up, or they will stay silent because they have too much to lose. So I can understand that. I'm not going to blame them. I totally blame the cheerleaders like the Anupam Khers and the Agnihotris of the world. Yeah,
Kanganas,
they are
yeah.
filth, and the Kanganas, they are filth. But all the people who are remaining silent, I don't know if I can blame them. They have too much to lose. They have families. They have jobs dependent on them. All their money, all of that, blah blah blah. I kind of get that, where that is coming from. But the thing is that all the younger people have less to lose. Like, for what it's worth, you guys have less to lose, right? I think the important thing at a time like this is, and I've been thinking about this also, what does one do? If you just look around you, you could be filled with despair all the time and paralyzed into doing nothing at all. But that can't be an option, right? So all you can therefore do is, sort of keep doing whatever you're doing. Like, there are things you can't control and there are things you can control, and the things that you can control, you control them. You make the best art you can. A lot of the finest art has come under deeply oppressive regimes like the Soviet Union, for example. A lot of the finest art, the satire, Solzhenitsyn, it happened in those oppressive times. So on whatever margins you can do whatever you're doing, I guess that's what all of us have to do. Like, there is this great saying from Kashi Ka Assi, bhar mein jaye duniya, hum bajaye harmonia. Now, there are two ways to interpret this. One is a way of saying that I'm just going to disassociate from the world, and I'm just going to not give a damn and play my harmonia. But the other way is that I can't change the world, but I'm going to play my harmonia and I'm going to make it the best fucking harmonia playing there is. So yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that is your only sort of option. But yeah, if you guys want to continue talking about politics, or we can move on to or
We can
go
move
back
back to movies, I guess.
go back to movies.
Harmonia बजाते थे.
Harmonia बजाते. So I actually wanted to ask you, and I'm getting a very good sense of what your opinion of Bollywood is, and I'm sensing that it's very similar to mine and Bharat, so I'm very happy about that. But uh, because you grew up in the sort of when Bollywood was everything. Of course, you were in a very rare position where you were exposed to world cinema at a young age, so you were very uniquely placed with these things. So how did you look at those golden years of Govinda, or any of those things? Like, what was your relationship with Bollywood growing up?
See, like you said, I was incredibly lucky to be exposed to a lot. And initially, my sense of Bollywood was snobbishness. That what is this bullshit, right? And that was a wrong attitude. I later realized. I've done a long episode with Jay Arjun Singh, the great film critic, where he also talks about sort of the journey. And later, I came to realize that it is a mistake to think of, say, a film by Fellini and to compare it with a film like Rahul Rawal, and it is a category error. They cannot be compared. That Bollywood is trying something very different. It comes from a different tradition, and if you are going to sort of compare them with each other, you're just making a category error. So and once I got round to that, and Govinda played a part because I love Govinda, and and once you realize that this is entertainment, this is escapism, it's got its own grammar, it's got its own imperatives, its own incentives, then you begin to enjoy it. Now, of course, the films that I hold dearest and close to my heart will not be Bollywood films, but I can appreciate Bollywood films, and I no longer look down on anybody who watches anything, right? Which is an early kind of snobbish attitude you have when you're young, that, oh, they are reading that book, or oh, they are watching that film. But and earlier you mentioned Home Alone 2 in an almost apologetic way. But the thing is that
I love it.
yeah, but the thing is that one should never be judgmental about any of this, because all of it is magic. I mean, just imagine you bring someone from the 18th century in a time machine and you put him down at that sofa and play Home Alone for him on a big screen. Like, oh my fucking God. It's just, right? It's just going to blow his mind so hard. And we are so jaded, we take everything for granted. But there is magic in everything. There are things to appreciate in but I'm not watching Kashmir Files or Ajay Devgan films, so
Oh, please don't.
there are
Please don't.
limits
Please
to
don't.
my there might be magic in
Acceptance.
everything, but my time is also scarce, so
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, that sort of concludes what I wanted to ask
Yeah.
you. Bharat, if there is something that you want to ask Amit, then
No, we can, if everything is done, then we can do the recommendation. So we do like,
or if Amit, if
yeah,
there's something from this conversation that you would like to touch upon,
yeah,
or otherwise also.
rather than discuss, when you said that we'll have recommendations, we'll have to recommend films, I made a list of stuff I like, and then I realized which with each of those there is a question attached to it, and I wanted to
okay.
turn the question back on you. So let's do a quick sort of rapid fire kind of thing. And the first one
Amazing.
obviously
Yes.
was, what have you discovered through what through a film critic or whatever, and I
Mm.
pointed out Richard Brody. Let me go through some of the others, and they will all sort of lead to recommendations. Right
Nice.
now, you guys are maybe too young to ask this, because this is something people in their 40s and 50s can answer. But the question is, what films did you absolutely love when you were very young, which you kind of, you wouldn't like it so much today? You might even be a little sort of
Mm.
embarrassed of it. And my choice, and I haven't actually watched it in the last 20 years, so who knows, maybe I'll love it. But when I was around 18 or 19, I watched this great film called Dead Poet Society,
Mm.
directed by Peter Weir.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
With
yeah.
Robin
Right.
Williams in it, encouraging his
Yeah.
students to sort of rebel and discover themselves through poetry and all of that. And it's just a stunning film with an incredible last scene I won't name. And I watched it at just the right age.
Mm.
At 18 or 19, when I saw it, it just completely blew me away, made me cry, really affected me hard. Today, I don't think it would affect me like that. I'd appreciate it for what it is and all of that. So is there something like that which you saw at a particular point in life and it meant something to you and it was special?
Oh man, I would. You mentioned Dead Poet Society. This is like, okay, there's a reason I mentioned Govinda, because growing up, I mean, you didn't have a choice to be a fan of Govinda. When you were our age, like it was on TV all the time. It's
It's
like,
like
what are
cartoons,
you
dude.
gonna? Yeah, what are you gonna do? Not watch Nayak, like if it's on TV? Like that wasn't an option. So I there's a film called Dhule Raja. Okay,
Yeah,
which is the last hour of it is complete dog shit. I don't even want to like. I even back then I didn't like it, but when I was a kid, I used to love watching that film again and again. And I recently, in fact, we've started this new thing on our channel and on our Instagram page where, and the first post of this was by Bharat, where we talk about media, otherwise like normally mediocre or quote unquote trashy or bad films, and we try to get the good out of it.
yeah.
And so the first film that Bharat spoke about was Phantom. I'm currently writing a post on
Oh, really?
Dhule Raja about how it's like some, like some socialist dream kind of. I know you're like kind of not into socialism, but it's like this complete anti-capitalist and raging kind of film, which is not what. And the premise of that film, I try to make an argument that if this film was made by like some French filmmaker or some indie filmmaker in India with like a soberish thing, but with the same plot points. Of course, you remove all the Bollywood dressing, and it would be like a classic. People would be quoting it and shit. Like, so that is one film of mine. But yeah, not a very rapid
Mm.
answer. But yeah, Bharat.
Yeah, for me, I think, see, I like to believe that a lot of the Bollywood mainstream films ka target audience is kids because they have simpler emotions and simpler these things. So for me, it was Kal Ho Na Ho because it made me cry. I remember crying in that
Oh
film.
my,
Yeah,
lame. Sorry.
exactly. Yeah. So because it was like an easy thing, right? It's as a kid you would cry at whatever. So that was the first film that I cried at, I believe. So yeah.
I mean, Dead Poet Society sounds amazing at this point. I'm just,
Yeah.
but yeah,
With Dule Raja and Kalhuna in
No,
contention.
never stand
yeah.
in judgment. What did I say? Never stand in judgment. Okay, so my next question, and a more positive one, is, what to you is a pinnacle of cinema, in the sense that when you saw it, you said, fuck, there can be nothing better than this. This is everything. And my answer would be Decalogue, which is, in a sense, I call it the first great web series. It's a
Yeah.
series of 10 films made by
Yeah.
Krzysztof Kieslowski for Polish television circa the late 80s, early 90s. and it was loosely based on the 10 commandments, and it was basically 10 short films of 1 hour each, with all the characters in this Warsaw apartment block. And
Yeah.
a couple of them were later expanded into a short film about love and a short film about
Yes.
killing. And I was just completely blown away by the kind of organic storytelling where which is so simple that you don't even notice that there is a film in front of you, that people have made it. It's just, it unfolds, and then you're just affected by it so deeply. And I given like when I tell my writing students about the concept of show don't tell, I give the example of a scene from it, which I think is from episode 6, which is the one about love, where um, this boy is
Hmm.
spying on the woman
Yes.
in the apartment
Right.
block opposite. And there is one scene where I forget whether he's delivering milk or newspapers or whatever every
Milk.
day to a house, but he decides to knock on the door and ask her for a date or whatever. And he knocks on the door, and she opens the door. And at this point, how a typical mainstream film would show is that show the dialogue. He says something, she says
Hmm.
something, he says something, she says something. But here you see the knocking, and then your next scene is a stop angle scene of him going round and round in the courtyard in a cycle in sheer joy, right? And
Hmm.
instantly you get it. You don't need to know anything else. And since you have an eyes wide shut background, there's a great quote by Kubrick, which he said about Kieslowski, which sums it up, where he was speaking about Kieslowski and his co-writer Krzysztof Pisiewicz's, I hope I pronounced it right, where he said that they, quote, have the very rare ability to dramatize their ideas rather than just talking about them, stop quote, which exactly is show don't tell. And you see that in the great filmmakers, and you see that in Kieslowski more than anyone else. So that for me is just a pinnacle of art. So what about you
Hmm.
guys?
Hmm. I mean, I have mine ready. And Kieslowski's, we were shown. I remember even in college, we were shown the decal. We were shown. I think a couple. I think these two we were shown. Short film about killing and short.
Yeah. Killing. Yeah.
Great stuff. So if you haven't seen it, please do watch it. But my two films that I feel are the pinnacle of cinema, and both of them are actually rather recent. One is Michael Haneke's Cache, which I
Hmm.
mean I saw it on my laptop, and I remember for the next half an hour. Normally after a film is over, I read about it a lot, and like I go to Letterboxd and I see people's reviews, and there are a lot of funny reviews and stuff and all that stuff. Even if I enjoy a film, but after I was just silent for so long, and then I started reading about it and about the themes, and ever since then I've watched it a couple more times, and I still feel like there's not enough that I have gotten out of it as much there is. So that is one, and the other one is like that film left me. I don't know for how long I didn't talk after that, which was Court. So
Hmm.
I saw it at Mami, and I went, and I've grown up in Lokhandwala, by the way. I've grown up in Shastri Nagar my entire life. So so Infinity Mall is very close. So I saw the film, I walked out, I had my earphones on, and I wasn't even listening to anything. Like I
Hmm.
did not even play anything. I just put it on like instinctively, and I just walked out of the theater, and I just walked home, and I just complete silence. I wasn't thinking and I just went home, and I felt like, as somebody who has aspired to be a filmmaker, who it
Stuck.
you know that moment. Oh, am I
Hmm.
stuck?
You were stuck for
You were
like five
stuck,
seconds.
Okay.
but
Yeah.
yeah.
So it is just something that when you realize whatever field you're in, something when it floors you so completely
Hmm.
that you suddenly are like, man, I don't know anything. Like that was that moment for me. So Court and Cache for me are those two, and Court is like, I love The Disciple also, and yeah, that's
Have you
it.
watched The Disciple, Amit?
Sadly, I haven't, and I want to add a little bit about Court because, and it's very weird. I haven't watched the Disciple, just haven't gotten down to it. But I thought Court was perhaps the best Indian film I had ever seen. It just blew me away that a young man making his first film could do something like
Mm.
this, and actually have the self confidence to let the story tell itself in a sense.
Yeah.
Like you see the camera, there aren't slick cuts, slick angles, a lot of movement, nothing. He just puts a camera, there's a frame, things happen, you're lost in it. And it reminds me of this sort of great story my friend Prem Panikar once told me about a writer, where I forget who the writer is, but this writer was asked about, how do you write? How do you find the peace of mind to write and do what you do? So the writer said, okay, so I go into a room where there's just my typewriter, and I close the door, and I sit down. So the person who was asking him the question said, "Okay, so then you start writing." And he said, "No, I don't start writing because I'm not alone. I still have with me all the people I want to please and all the people who have expectations of me and all of that. So I wait for them to leave." So then the guy asked him, "Oh, so then you write?" So he said, "No, because I am still in the room and I wait for myself to leave and then the story tells itself." And that's kind of what I kind of felt about Court. And for a director to therefore have that self confidence with his first film, to absent himself and let the story be everything, and such a story and told so well, it like Aditya said, it just floored me completely. But what would your answer be, Bharat?
Bharat, but before you go, sorry, just before you go on, because Court came up, I remember, and this is another thing, just harking back to Bollywood, an interview of him where he actually said that he doesn't see many opportunities for himself in Bollywood. Like even his second film, it was because he won that Rolex thing, and then he went with, I think Cuarón sort of mentored him, and then he had that international sort of cred. But it's like he's arguably the best filmmaker in India right now, and there's barely any. Anyway, so yeah, Bharat.
Yeah, for me, I feel there's this French filmmaker who is also considered a part of the French New Wave. His name is Jean-Pierre Melville, and he essentially, started the current gangster film form. So he has a bunch of these gangster movies which have basically set up this code of gangsters, right? The kind of thing that you see replicated or taken forward in Godfather, right, where he talks about honor in crime. All of that sort of, and also then taken forward by Quentin Tarantino in his Reservoir Dogs and all of that. So that was not only started but perfected by Melville, and he gave himself that name. Melville was not the name that he was born with. He gave himself the name Melville based on his favorite writer, right? And his films are about economy of dialogue. It's about, in fact, his films are so sparse that you'll again, like how Amit mentioned, you'll forget at times that you're watching a movie. It's just images playing one after the other, and then how to how to do away with dialogue without doing away with information. It's not that his frames are dead or that his scenes are lacking in any information. There is in fact more information in each frame than any of the talking films that you see. So I was completely, again, it was like opening a door I did not know existed, which is that you can tell a story entirely through, visuals and the rhythm of editing. The best way I feel to learn the rhythm of editing is to not, I mean, there is a rhythm to cutting dialogue as well, but for me, it was completely new to discover and completely on my own, because this is something that no mentor told me or no film critic introduced me to this. This is something that I just stumbled upon. So for me, this was both a discovery that I'd made myself, so it was all the more special. And secondly, it was understanding the rhythm in uh, editing without the use of dialogue. So I see myself mimicking that a lot in my work. I see myself trying to sometimes, harming my like the work that I'm doing by trying to do away with dialogue. And then I have to pull myself back saying, no, this is not the story, or this is not the film best suited for that, format or whatever, or approach. So yeah, Jean-Pierre Melville's films. I've not named any one, but my favorite would be, or at least the one that I keep going back to, is Army of Shadows, because it's about you remember, Aditya, you watched this, huh?
Yeah, you've been, anyway, I've seen it.
Yeah, so Army of Shadows. Okay, yeah,
Superb. I can't wait to watch it. So my next question, and who knows, you might even have the same answer as me because this film came at Mami. But my next question is, which film fills you with a joy for cinema? That and my answer is a film that ran in Mami a couple of years back, the Japanese film One Cut of the Dead. Right? Did you guys see that?
yeah.
I
It's
haven't
this
yet, but yeah.
it's this delightful horror
Yes.
film about a bunch of people making a horror film, and it's like a film within a film, and it's just delightful. It was made for the equivalent of 20 lakhs. It grossed more than the equivalent of 200 crores. Right. So even that is joyful, that somebody can just go out there and make something so cheap and then it blows up and becomes so huge. But I remember, watching the film when I did in Bami, and me and everybody around us, and we were just, just laughing with joy and happiness at the end of it, because all that, it's a bunch of filmmakers trying to make a film, and their joy and our joy and everything just kind of came together, and just such a tremendous film. So what would you say?
I mean, mine is a film that we were shown in college, which is Ed Wood, which is by that. What's the director's name, man? He's the Tim Burton. Tim Burton. And I remember the thing is, because I was really, really scared at the time, because I was about to shoot my own first short film, and I was just out of my wits at that time. I was just sort of panicking. I was a mess. And I remember one day before I was going to shoot the film, this was Fat Boy Bharat. But so one day before we had a screening in college, and our director was showing us Ed Wood. And I remember watching that film, and I remember spoilers. So it's not a spoilery kind of film, but yeah. So spoilers for those who haven't seen it, which is, even at the end, these guys are making this historically terrible film, and they look so proud, and they're like, so like, for example, Johnny Depp's character, he's like so happy at the end of it, and he truly believes that this will be great. So as someone who's a part of this whole thing, I'm very
there's a beautiful scene in that film that I still remember, where he meets Orson Welles.
Yes, and in that bar, and that's real Orson Welles ka footage. Yeah.
And he actually meets Orson Welles, and he's so inspired by him, and I think he gives him some gyan also. You just go ahead, dude, like, just make your film. So it was like, every student filmmaker.
So that's the thing. That's why whenever I feel, and there are tons of moments like this for anyone who's in this field, as Bharat will also know, where you're feeling completely down and out. The 10th project has been shelved, or like some promise somebody made has been whatever, and you're just feeling that. And I just watched a movie like that, and I'm like, you know what, it's fine, as long as you are into it for a good reason, that you want to tell stories and you're passionate about it. It's fine, and you just do it. So yeah, it just makes me really happy. So yeah,
I think I have a different sort of way of answering this question, because for me it's about what, like, the magic of cinema when I was, especially in my formative years as in college and all of that, was कि यार बिना पैसे के, बिना approach के, and not looking at international cinema, but like somebody back home, who's doing this. It was Kashyap's lesser films, especially something like That Girl in Yellow Boots, because the way he shot it was like with his camera in fucking the bylanes of Lokhandwala or wherever, and the film was almost entirely shot like that. It included friends. It included all the favors that he, pulled. There's a random shot of Rajat Kapoor just walking by, in that film, which has nothing to do with the film. It's like a misdirection. And also, to an extent, Ugly, because Ugly also was, very Bombay based and very jugadu in the way, like, you can actually tell that this is not actually, these extras are not actually extras. These are real people walking down the street and wondering what the fuck this guy is doing, right? So for me, the joy of filmmaking truly comes through in Kashyap's smaller films, the films where the least has been planned. I also see myself operating the best in those kind of conditions. Maybe it's a projection of Kashyap's, early or lesser work. But I also get inspired कि यार अगर ये कर सकता है तो मैं भी कुछ ना कुछ तो बना ही सकता हूँ. So for me, that is the answer.
And actually, Bharat is not, sorry, Amit, but Bharat is not completing that thing. But because literally when we graduated out of college, one of the first, I got a job, and then I quit that job pretty soon, because me and our other third co-host started co-directed, and Bharat and I co-wrote a film which has been made, and the trailer of it is on this channel, but we just had never put it out. And we hope to. And it was made in that way. It was made in like my house, because I live in Bombay, so we got like It has like my younger cousin who was in like 9th stand at that time.
Yeah.
He's in college now. So
We're like,
yeah.
let's do a new realism thing and let's not cast
Yeah, we
actors.
just went completely. Yeah, we cast no actors. We did like full workshop. My cousins are terrible at it. He hates me for it because I just like sort of bullied him throughout.
And he's still waiting.
throughout
Like
the process.
then he was in 9th or 10th standard. He told
Yeah,
his friends,
he's in
I'm
college.
acting in a film, this summer. And he's now in college.
Yeah, and they haven't let him forget it. They keep telling him like they keep joking with him that, oh, you're just fucking with us, you're just lying, because he was never part of any film. So yeah, it's
Well, all
yeah,
his friends can watch this now and understand why.
yeah. We actually hope to put that out soon. So actually I will send it to you also. It's not that great or anything, but yeah, just to get your views on it whenever. Yes.
So I'll end it with a couple of last questions, because I guess you have, your viewers must also be wondering, it is never this long, what is going on? What's the best adaptation of a film from a book in your view? Like for me, it's a film called The Dead, which was John Huston's last film, which he made based on James Joyce's short story. So it's a 1986 film, and Huston was dying at the time, and it's the last thing he did. I don't think he even lived to see the release of the film. And it's a wonderful film, wonderful short story set in a particular time. The film is very faithful to the short story, and yet stands out for its power. And there's one great scene in it which has a story behind it, and the backstory is beautiful, which is when which is his daughter Angelica Houston starred in it, and her character at one point near the end of the film, she's walking up the steps, and then she hears somebody in the living room upstairs singing a song that her teenage lover used to sing to her 40 years ago, and her face is full of emotion. And that's a beautiful scene, and is beautiful acting. And the backstory is that when that scene was shot, she turned around and she looked down and she saw her father, John Huston, in a wheelchair, and she knew he's about to die soon. And that's where the emotion came from. So, but a stunning film in every way. So I strongly recommend you guys watch it. I think it's on YouTube also, maybe. So what would your picks be?
Let's think about this.
Yeah, this is kind of embarrassing because we did an episode with Vani from Chalchitra on like our favorite adaptations, and I'm just drawing a blank now. But I remember in that episode I had spoken about in college. In first year I had read the book Trainspotting, and I fell in love with that book, especially the way it's written in that accent and all that stuff. So I remember when I watched the film, and I actually don't recall the book that much. I don't think I even finished it, to be honest. I think the last 50 pages I was like, fuck this. And but the thing is, when I watched the film, I was like, there can never be a more apt adaptation of something like this, because the way that text has been translated to, and just the way the film starts, with that monologue of choose life, like just that captures the broad essence of the book, the zeitgeist or whatever it's trying to capture of its time. So yeah, on first thought, that's what comes to mind, but I'm sure if I think about this, I'll get there'll be others.
I also have a similar way, like reason to select the film that I'm talking about, and we spoke about this in the last episode only, Aditya. It's a film called A Scanner Darkly by Richard Linklater, and it's based on a book of the same name by Philip Dick, who's also one of my favorite writers. I think part of the reason is because Philip Dick is a Hollywood favorite, right? A lot of these Hollywood films, good and bad, have been adapted into are based on his books. But very rarely do I find, in fact, only in the case of A Scanner Darkly do I find that the madness and the paranoia and the absolute, ridiculousness of the book is captured by Richard Linklater. And I think it's truly, it's also playing into the style of Richard Linklater's films, which is like meandering, with breaking form, and completely at all times subverting your expectation of what the next scene will be. And that's so similar a feeling I got while reading not just A Scanner Darkly, but a lot of Philip Dick's other work, which by the way has been adapted into completely conventional stories. So for me, A Scanner Darkly was like a big fuck you to the Hollywood system of adaptation, and also by doing that being the most faithful adaptation of a Philip Dick book. Yeah.
Yeah. So my last question is, and this is a film I discovered through a critic, which is, reading Roger Ebert about it. But what I love about the film is that it gets to the essence of what cinema should do or what art should do. And this is a film called Goodbye Solo by Ramin Behrani. And he's an American filmmaker. And basically, the plot of the film is that there's an African American cab driver who is driving around in this American city, and this 70-year-old white man gets in and he offers him a deal. He says, I'll give you $1,000, but 10 days later I want you to drive me to the top of this mountain, which is a place so windy that the snow goes up, right? And he just wants to go there. There's no return trip there. It's a lonely place. It's pretty obvious that he plans to kill himself, right? That's the whole deal. And the way the film kind of proceeds, it's just brilliant. And Ebert writes about it. And Ebert is writing about Behrani at the end. And I think this gets to the heart of what artists try to do, where Ebert says he loves the city, and you can tell that in this film. He is curious about people, and you can tell that from all his films. He told me that he asks the same question of all his characters: how do you live in this world? Stop quote. And I thought that's such a beautiful quote, and it gets to the heart of what the film is about. And the film gets to the heart of what I think all films and books and music also, in a sense, try to answer.
I have not watched this movie. I will. This is the same guy who made White Tiger, right?
Ramin Behrani, maybe. I'm not sure. I think he did do some mainstream work after this, but he had a great film before this called Chop Shop, which is also hugely this thing. But Goodbye Solo for me is just an incredible film. But for you guys, what film would you be that got closest to sort of getting to where you think art should go, whether it's cinema or whatever, or just
I actually I don't know if it's the appropriate answer for this question, but I discovered this film in a similar way in terms of a critic. I actually don't even remember who the critic was. It was in a newspaper, and I was in college, and Aankho Dekhi had just released, and it was a blink and you miss it release. It was in the theater for a day or something, or 2 days, I think. And I think the critic, and for the life of me I cannot remember who this was, but had written about how it was a tragedy that a film like this just comes and goes and nobody notices. And I read that whole, and it was a glowing sort of review. And that's when I saw Aankho Dekhi, and I was I mean, a few steps short of maybe Court and all, but like it is as close to me, that film. And I keep rewatching it because I think you mentioned the film also, or I think your guest had mentioned, Uday Bhatia had mentioned it in your episode with him on Satya, in fact, and his book, which I mean to read. But about how Aankho Dekhi was sort of a new bridge between a new sort of bridge between Bollywood convention and a middle of the road film, as they're called, and as they used to be with Rishikesh Mukherjee and all those people, and how Aankho Dekhi sort of, and I would like more films like that to be made. I feel like that's a space that I really like, which is something that it, the setting and all of those things of the film are so understandable. Like I can show that film to my grandparents, and I have actually, and they will also appreciate it. A Court, maybe they will just doze off, so, but something like this I can show it to them, and I actually did. Again, I'm repeating myself, but so, and they really enjoyed it, and it's just something that I hold very dear. So yeah,
for me, I think it's a difficult question to answer, but I do have an answer. I feel I was introduced to the films of Saeed Akhtar Mirza through a college screening, which was Arvind Desai ki Ajeeb Dastan.
Oh my God.
And that film, because it straddles not just sociopolitics, and also it also talks about, again, what the place of man in society, and it tackles depression. It is a concoction of all of those things. And for a young person who has perhaps not felt all of these emotions, or perhaps not always just has had a secondary or vicarious experience of these things, it was eye-opening for that matter. And I then went on to watch his other films, which is Salim Langde Pe Matro and Albert Pinto Gussa Kyun Aata hai and all of that. And they continue down the same road, right? They exist between this, in this curious, sub, or whatever that's called, that overlap of society, political identity, individual identity. And he's somebody a lot of filmmakers, when they're making films based on like a social issue, they often discard the individual, or they use the individual as a medium to explore something. But I feel with Saeed Akhtar Mirza, he never loses sight of the person and making this person interesting. I think that's also seen in shades of Sudhir Mishra's films also, like a Dharavi. But it's just so curious, and I just feel that today we don't have a parallel to that. Today, in India especially, we do not have a parallel to that kind of that approach. I'm not saying good or bad. You can make a bad film with that approach, but have that approach at least, right? The closest I can think of is Dibakar Banerjee, who tries to somewhat stray in that space. So yeah.
Yeah, I was actually about to mention that Sandeep or Pinky Farrar sort of, I don't know whether it's a successful attempt at this or not, is for the jury, but I think it has that kind of an approach.
It does.
So yeah.
Anyway, that's about it, I guess.
But Amit, we usually do recommendations, but I feel like there is like so much that we have from you today.
What are you currently consuming? That could be an interesting thing to answer.
That's very cool.
So yeah, that's interesting because I don't actually watch as much cinema now as I would like. It's kind of sad. In fact, that's one reason Mami was such a big deal for me when it was happening. Because even if I didn't watch films a whole year, I could just, in those couple of weeks where Mami was going on, I could kind of just indulge myself. And cinema is incredibly stimulating, right? Every time you watch a good film, you're excited. It's there. So I'm afraid I read much more than I watch cinema. So I haven't really been watching that. I haven't seen anything recently that's excited me so much, but now that I have all the recommendations which you guys have made, I'm going to check them out.
Great.
That's great. Before we end the episode, we would like to give our own recommendations as well. Bharat, do you have any recommendations today?
No. I recommended this the last time and I just finished reading that book. It's fine. You can move on.
What was your recommendation last
time? Shivaji. Remember, there was a book on Shivaji that I'm reading.
Right.
By Dennis.
Right.
Yeah, Dennis Kincaid, if I'm not
wrong. I have two, both widely different, but one is a short film. I don't know how many of you all know the film The Square. It was at Mami also, in fact, a couple of years ago.
It won at Cannes.
Yeah, it did. And so the same director had about 10 years before, like in 2010, had made a short film called Incident by a Bank. Yeah, it's on Mubi. It's a short film. And if you like Badlapur, okay. Because the Badlapur first shot is just that. So yeah, and but the way that it's a very interesting short film is all I'll say. And it's very funny as well. That's one. The other thing is a very weird recommendation, which is there's a game I really like to play, which is called Civilization 6, and I'm sort of obsessed with it. And there is a YouTuber who's my like go-to chill when I just want to like lay low and just watch something. He does like Civilization streams, and it's essentially a game. It's like, if you guys know Age of Empires, it's like that, but a lot more elaborate, and it's very cool. You get these historical figures and you build empires. You can win in, there are like different victory conditions. You can become like a space race, or you can do like you can win by domination, or the religious victory. You can convert the entire world to your invented religion and all that. So very cool stuff. So this guy Potato McWhiskey on YouTube does these streams, but recently he has gotten there's a new game that has launched which is very similar to Civilization, which is called Dune Spice Wars, and it is based in the Dune universe.
Nice.
Harkonnen or Atreides or the Fremen or whatever, and they all have different things, and you have to basically get control of Arrakis. And this guy has started, like, that game is it's on like beta right now. So this guy has been playing it and it's really cool. So
Yeah.
if any of y'all, even if you, because I know a lot of people will watch it and they will not be able to get into these games, because I am just a nerd about this, so I can get into it, but a lot of people can't. But I would recommend watch this guy's videos, and then maybe you will want to, and then please get in touch with me so we can play, because I don't know anyone else who plays this stuff. So yeah, Potato McWhiskey and Incident by a Bank on Mubi. So yeah, those are my two recommendations. um I guess
I
that
can end with a I
concludes.
can end with a couple of
Yes.
quick recommendations. I actually cut the question short because I thought your show has gone on long enough. But so without elaborating too much, I was going to ask you, and you can give a rapid fire answer with just a film name without elaborating. What is the most underrated recent film you have seen, which you are surprised did not get more acclaim? And in my case, it's again a film I saw at Mami, a 2018 film called Waves by Trey Edward Schultz, and it's just a brilliant film. Went under the radar, got extremely got incredible reviews, but didn't do anything commercially at all. And it's this powerful film which is really told in two registers, whereas the first half of the film is just full of energy, and it's just incredible, and everything about it, the cinematography and the music and everything is playing to the same. And the second
Mhm.
half is very quiet, very slow, very understated, and how well they work together. And I was kind of blown away that why aren't people why isn't this film successful, why isn't it there at the Oscars? So I didn't get that. The reviews were also really great, but I was like, am I the only one who kind of liked it? So yeah, that's one of mine. And also what another question I was going to ask is, which are films that you appreciate not for story, not for what's going on, not at an intellectual level, but just viscerally? And my answer to that would be Gaspar Noé's film Climax, which
Okay.
again you might have seen at Mami,
Yeah, yeah.
and Darren Aronofsky's Mother, both of which I
Ah,
absolutely loved. I just totally loved them. And at some point during those films, I think you have to stop overthinking and just give in to the experience.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, so these are my final kind of recommendations. And if you would like to quickly, most visceral and most underrated recent film.
So I think underrated for me is Jhund. Have you watched it?
Oh
Just watch
yeah,
it.
for me as well. Same.
Jhund is the most underrated film in India in the past year. I would say. I don't know why it didn't succeed, because it's by Nagraj Manjule and it's a very good film. Just watch it. And the visceral, with the question about that, I would say Run Lola Run, if you guys have watched that.
Yeah, of course.
So just there is no logic to that film, but it just has a kinetic sort of quality to it. Yeah.
Uh, I actually Jhund, yeah, would be the underrated one. I
Hmm.
don't think I can recall any film I've viscerally connected to, so I should watch the ones that you guys have recommended. And I tried to connect once to Bharat's recommendation. I could never go back to Jodorowsky's El Topo.
Oh,
I
dude.
think. Oh no, was it El Topo
El
or was it
Topo.
the other one?
It was
Yeah,
both.
I tried. I watched almost the whole thing. I cannot connect. I'm sorry.
Um,
I couldn't miss.
Amit, have you
Yeah.
watched these films?
I haven't watched Jodorowsky, I'm afraid. I must tell me about them.
So there are these two films called El Topo, and then there's one called The
Holy
Holy Mountain.
Mountain, yes. Holy Mountain was
And
damn good.
yeah,
Yes.
if you want to get into this weird fucking dreamscape, nightmarescape, not even dreamscape,
It's
just
not
watch it.
Dreamscape.
Yeah,
Done,
just
done.
just
Got
watch
fun.
it. Yeah, chalo.
Yeah. But yes,
Cool.
thank you so much, Amit, for joining us
Yeah,
on the
thanks so much.
podcast.
Thank you for having
Thank
me
you.
on and being so patient. This was
Oh
great.
no, not at all. I mean, thank you for giving us your time, because I'm sure like you read a lot, and I know that you read a lot. Like the amount of prep you do for your episodes is like infamous.
Yeah, yeah.
So with actually, before we end, I would just like to point two things. One is, of course, as always, please subscribe. If you're new here, please subscribe to the channel. You can also check us out on Spotify, on Google Podcast, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. You can, if you like the podcast and would like us to continue doing this, because there's no guarantee we will, so please give us the right motivation. So either subscribe, if you'd like to help us, if you can afford it, then either on the YouTube membership or on our Buy Me a Coffee page. Along with that, a little plug: tomorrow is going to be the first episode of Aditya Learns to Read. Amit, that's our new book review series.
Nice.
The trailer of which is on our channel, but that's a new podcast essentially that we're starting. And I had sort of lost touch with reading for a while, so I'm getting back into that. And this year I'm going to read like 40-50 books, which is not much, but like for me it's a lot. So I'm going to be reviewing books on that. So the first episode of that is going to come out tomorrow, so do watch out for that. And yeah,
Amit, do you have like a plug to make for your
I have no plug. I just want to say, if you're here because of the Seen and the Unseen and because of me, please subscribe to these guys. Like, subscribe, watch everything else that they've done. This is, I think, episode 70. So that's mind blowing. You got 69 episodes to binge watch. And Aditya,
Just the
best
right
of luck
amount.
with Aditya learns to read. That sounds great. I'm going to tune in.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Cheers. Thank you.
And that was the episode. Thank you for watching, everyone.